Hey there, guys. Hope you're not getting sick of me. I'm going to talk about couple things this morning. I know you're real anxious to get out there and just do some buggy whipping, but I'm telling you that's fine. But just hold off so you can understand these concepts that I really know are invaluable to you becoming a fly fisherman. So today, this morning, I want to talk about fly lines, leaders, and tippet. So we'll just start with fly lines. Here we have the exact same reel that you have loaded with fly line here. So I guess I can just start by saying, as I pull the line off the reel, I notice that I have this clear monofilament that you would recognize as just kind of regular fishing line like you would have on a spin rod. And then that's tied with a nail knot here to this more rubbery, actually PVC fly line. So there's been a lot of technology that's gone into the fly line. But as I mentioned before, the line itself is going to match the reel size. So in this case, this is a 5-weight line. And, here we go. I got a bunch of line that I want to load onto my reels when I get ready. So here we go. We've got a Real Gold WF5 forward, and that's designated by a WF5 forward. So not knowing what any of that means can be a little confusing. Let's just kind of put it forward as simple as possible. So first of all, the fly line is a little more technical than you might think. If you feel it, it's very slippery and almost has this like little bit of gel on it. In fact, in the old days and still today to some extent, you can get like a dressing. So here's an antique dressing for fly line. That kind of restores the finish and makes it that much more slippery. So it smoothly comes off the reel and goes through your fishing rod lines with ease. Okay, so the line is so integral to fishing, way more than it is with spin fishing. Because in spin fishing, it's just that single taper, monofilament, and when you cast the rod, what allows the rod to propel the bait or the lure forward is in fact the weight of the bait or the lure. In fly fishing, we do cast weighted lines sometimes, but it's way more about the actual weight of the line as opposed to the fly on the end of the line. So there are different ways in which the line is tapered or weighted. So, in other words, this line actually gets thicker as it goes toward the tip of the line. This is, of course, blown up. Gets thicker as it goes toward the tip of the line. What that allows for is for the line to naturally, physically shoot off the end of the rod as your wrist propels the rod itself. So the spine of the rod, right, the action of the rod, and the line is what allows this line to propel forward. So depending on the type of fishing you're doing, that taper will be different. So there's things like a shooting taper, which is like a bomb. Like, you can shoot it way across a big river or a lake. Or there's more delicate tapers for smaller waters, like you would fish in Vermont, where you don't want to spook the fish. But regardless, it's all tapered where it becomes heavier toward the front of the line. Most lines are floating lines. So they actually, the line itself, the yellow in this case, will actually float on top of the water. That's because there are little tiny air bubbles blown all through this line. And those air bubbles will be distributed at different levels depending on where you want the line to float. Sometimes it's like high float, sometimes it's a mid float, so it might sink a little bit. And they do actually sell sinking tip line. I don't actually have any. I'd like to get some because that's for deeper waters where you're nymphing or fly fishing underneath the surface. But for classic fly fishing, it's a floating line. So remember, this all used to be made of silk or natural materials. when we started getting plastics, it just revolutionized the sport of fly fishing and allowed it to explode into the modern way it is today. So, what does this mean when I read on my new package of line here, when it says WF5F? So what this says is the WF stands for weight forward, meaning the weight is in front of the line, and then the F stands for forward. So what that means is that this is weight forward, but it's even doubly weight forward. So this is a line that's going to be designed for a lot of power at a pretty short range. So in fact, it says front bias weight to load front bias weight to load rods at close range. Taper designed to cast flies between size 22, which is very, very small, and size 2, which can be pretty big. So a pretty standard fly line for common types of trout fishing. So I've got another line here. This one's technical trout. And this one says DT 5 forward. So interesting, the DT in this stands for double taper, which means that when the fly line gets kind of worn out on one end, I can turn it so the back of the rod becomes the front of the rod, and it's also tapered that way. So this is an economic way to kind of change out your lines. I change out my lines probably once every 2 to 3 years. Line is really expensive. Good line is $60, so that's totally different than monofilament that you would buy for your spin rod, but it's worth it. In fact, I'd say spend more money on the good line than on the good reel, because the line really is what allows that fly rod to excel. Again, remembering that it is the taper of the fly line and the power of the rod, not the arm, but of the rod, of the flex in the rod, that's going to propel the line. So moving on, your next piece of material on this is called a leader. The leader is monofilament, and monofilament is what you recognize as kind of regular fly line. But in fact, regular spin fishing line. But in fact, that's not the case. What this is made out of the same material, but it too is tapered from thicker at the butt to thinner in the front, allowing for more propulsion of the rod, but also a more delicate presentation of the fly. So the fly is going to land on the water without a big splash or hoopla. And it too has different weights. So depending on how big the fish you're going after, how strong the river current is, how sporting or challenging you want it to be to land the fish, and how many times you anticipate getting snagged, that weight of the tippet's going to change. So in this case, so is the length, by the way. The longer the length, the harder it is to cast the rod, but the less you're likely to spook the fish. Makes sense. So this is 7.5 feet. It's a 2x 12 pound tippet. Explain that in a minute, but 12 pounds, huge. So I'm using this for pike for the most part. That's a massive, or steelhead. I'm not going to be using this for most trout fishing that I'm doing. So this is just what I happen to drag out. So the 2x stands for a complicated formula. The X stands for a complicated formula that I don't fully understand. But basically what I do understand is that it's counterintuitive. The lower the number, right, the more weight the tippet can withstand. So in other words, a 2x, pretty big, whereas if I got a 5x, which I frequently fish here in Vermont, or even an 8x, that's going to break, that tensile strength is going to break at less poundage. So so if I have a 5x, pretty sure that's going to break at, something like 3 pounds, 4 pounds. I know when I go to Montana, I definitely get heavier tippets, because I know the first time I was out there fishing hard, I was fishing, what I fish here in Vermont, which is like an 8x tippet. And I had a couple of huge fish, massive, nice rainbows. Snap! They broke me off. And I'm like, what on earth is going on? And my buddy is like, dude, what are you fishing for leaders? And I told him, he's like, that's crazy. He's like, A, you can put the mustard to these fish. In other words, they're less shy than the fish you're fishing back in Vermont. So don't be afraid of being a little more brazen about the size of tippet that you use. B, the river is flowing way faster, and you're going to fight these fish longer, so you need to have a heavier tippet on there. So that's what I did. So again, I don't know what's on yours, because I don't think it said on the package, but I bet it's like a 5X. I noticed there's no tippet on this. So tippet is super important. And here's a couple spools of tippet. Tippet also has that X rating for that equation. The lower the number, the stronger the tippet can handle. So for here, this is 3X, has a tensile strength of 8.2 pounds, whereas here's 5X, which is going to break at actually 5 pounds. I fish a lot of 5X. Let's see what else we have on here. Another 5X, no surprise there. Another 5X. So definitely, I guess this spool is set up for fishing big Vermont trout waters, where I may be getting into some pretty heavy fish. But I also have the lighter tippet as well. So tippet length can be adjusted and shortened depending on the spookiness of the fish. And it has a no taper. It's literally just fishing line. That's all it is. So why have it? Well, when you attach it to your leader, it gives you more of a subtle approach. So that means that the fly is going to be further away from the colored PVC line, and it also allows you to not eat up your leader. So what I mean by that is leaders are expensive. Like, I don't know, I think this is like $8, maybe 12. It's a lot of money. So every time you go fishing, if you're taking a leader, that starts to add up. But if you tie a little bit of tippet onto your leader, the tippet's cheap, and you don't mind as you change flies or break a fly off, you're not eating into your leader as fast. In fact, they've even started selling these tiny little rings called tippet rings, which allow you to eat up even less of your leader if you're trying to save money. It really makes sense. So same thing here. I'm saying in Vermont, we're fishing anywhere from like 3X down to 6X for our tippet. And that tippet just is an extension of the leader, which allows for more subtlety. So if you have really clear water, really finicky fish, really selective, you want a longer leader and perhaps even a lighter leader. But that's risky because obviously with that lighter leader, you can break it off. Now keep in mind, you can with a fly rod land a bigger fish than weight-wise than it would say on that your leader or tippet could handle. So a 9-pound fish, which would be a massive, massive trout, but a 9-pound trout could be landed on this 3X tippet just by playing it in and never letting it get that full purchase on the line. So in the old days, what people did is these were tied with monofilament or natural materials, and they would tie them in a taper. So they'd start with thicker material and go down to thin material. That's pretty cool. I'd like to do some more of that in my life, but in reality, it's pretty nice to have that manufactured taper. Many of these have a loop, which makes the knot tying much easier. We are going to go over knot tying because that can be complicated. Lost a lot of fish because of bad knots. And that then leads to your tippet, which is really just an economic way to make the trout less spooky, not eat up your actual expensive leader. And then your fly line, which has different tapers for different applications, but most of the time it's weight forward. It's floating by air bubbles, which doesn't mean a floating line still can have a slightly sinking fly because this doesn't float. So if your fly is meant to sink because it's got a little bead on it or something, it's going to sink a few feet in the water. If a fly is really bushy, a bushy dry fly, it's going to float on top of the water. So I know this stuff is probably maybe a little bit boring for you. I don't really know, but this is the minute intricacies that really are going to allow you to really understand what you're doing when you're getting out on the river, give you more success, and allow you to dive into this even deeper. So thanks for your time, guys. Like to see you checking in a little bit more on these suckers, getting some work in. I hope you're doing well. We'll see you soon. Bye.